Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library. And I have a great story to tell you. To entertain you tonight, I'm going to tell you about Bigfoot, or the Sasquatch, a well known American cryptid. That is to say, a creature whose existence is neither proven nor acknowledged by the scientific community. Its origins lie in folklore and alleged sightings rather than the identification of specimens. Next, we will stay in America, but this time we will venture south to explore the story of the Bell Witch. There's no need for concern. None of these tales are frightening or horrific. As always, we'll enjoy unraveling these mysteries while attempting to approach them rationally, distinguishing between fact and speculation. As always, you do not need to watch the video to follow along. If you wish to, you may close your eyes and forget about any worries as we embark on this adventure together. Also, we just launched a Patreon page for those of you who wish and can support this project and get more of it. If you join, you will get various new things, like the possibility to listen to all episodes with or without background sounds, regular bonus episodes. We already have two exclusive stories for our patrons, one about the history of glassmaking and stained glass, and one about the mysterious men in the Iron Mask. And we are already working on our third story. You will be able to download all these audios, and you will also have your say on the choices of topics, advance releases, and updates on upcoming episodes. We hope to see you there soon so that we may continue developing Lights Out Library, which we enjoy so much. You will find links in the description box and the first comment pinned under the video. If you fall asleep and wish to resume the video later or jump directly to a particular part of the story, timestamps are also listed in the description and pinned in the first comment, as well as links to different streaming options like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music, which may be better suited for you. You can listen to our stories in Spanish at La Biblioteca de los Sueños. We have included a link to it as well. But before we begin, assume a comfortable position. Take a long, deep, relaxing breath. When you exhale, release the tension in your shoulders, your neck. Release the tension in your facial muscles too, and allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. Let's begin with our first story of the night, shall we? Bigfoot. Is it real? The creature is also known as the Sasquatch, and some may be familiar with the Yeti, its Asian cousin. We'll return to that topic later. Many know Bigfoot as a creature reputed to inhabit the forests of North America, particularly in the Northwest, an area that boasts some of the largest, densest, and wildest forests in the United States. However, sightings have been reported all across the U.S. and in Canada. Interestingly, it seems that Sasquatch has very old origins, at least as a legend. In many indigenous cultures of North America, both ancient and contemporary, there are tales of mysterious creatures living in the forests. Descriptions of their appearance and behavior varied. They weren't necessarily ape-like, like Bigfoot, But most of the time, these creatures had an ape-like or human-like appearance, only larger and hairier. For instance, in California, there are petroglyphs, carvings in rock, left by the Yokuts, an ethnic group of Native Americans native to Central California. These petroglyphs depict a group of large creatures, possibly in a threatening posture, that some believe to represent a group of Bigfoots. These glyphs are estimated to be at least 500 years old, and possibly up to 1,000 years old, which indicates they were created before the arrival of Europeans in California. Interestingly, among the first European Spanish settlers and explorers that arrived in California from Mexico in the 16th century, there were tales of so-called dark watchers, or vigilantes oscuros, who were said to stalk their camps at night. Meanwhile, far to the east, in what is now the state of Mississippi, there were stories among the Natchez people and other Native American groups in the 18th century about a hairy creature in the woods known for screaming loudly and stealing livestock. These accounts were reportedly documented at the beginning of the 18th century by a French priest. Yet in another corner of America, in the Northwest, the Lumi tribe told tales about creatures known as semiques. These creatures were described as living in the woods, resembling apes or humans but bigger, wilder. These creatures were not necessarily malevolent, but possibly dangerous, so it was generally advisable to avoid them. To cite another example, this time from the Northeast, there's the Iroquois tale of an aggressive, hairy giant with rock-hard skin. These examples are only a few of many from across the United States and Canada. These stories come from everywhere and were not necessarily specific or more common in the Northwest of the United States and the Pacific coast of Canada, which are the regions generally associated with Bigfoot today. Actually, if we broaden the scope a bit, it could be argued that such tales are not specific to North America. Other cryptids, for example, include the Yeti from the Himalayan folklore. The Yeti, also sometimes called the abominable snowman, is often described as a large creature, similar to a gorilla but standing upright, with brown, gray, or white hair and large, sharp teeth. Supposedly residing in the Himalayan mountains, the Yeti bears a striking resemblance to Bigfoot. The Himalayan Yeti is quite famous around the world, but it also has lesser-known relatives in Asia. For example, China mentions a creature called the Yeren, dating back to the Warring States period, over 2,000 years ago. In Mongolia, there's Alma or Almasti, said to live in the mountains of West Mongolia, even extending as far west as the Caucasus Mountains. In Australia, there's the Yowie, a creature emerging from Aboriginal traditions, purported to inhabit the Australian outback. If we relax the criteria a bit, it appears that many cultures around the world harbor tales about strange creatures living in the wild, stronger and more savage than humans, uncivilized, less intelligent, but better adapted to life in the wilderness. In other words, these are larger-than-life creatures. Some ethnologists speculate that such stories could spring from a human need, perhaps a need to imagine a wilder counterpart, or simply because quick and distant sightings of animals in forests or mountains were interpreted as humanoid creatures because people were constantly checking for the presence of intruders. They might have seen what they were looking for. These are just hypotheses to explain why these mythical creatures seem universal. Another theory is that since America was populated from Asia, perhaps these myths, possibly existing in Asia during prehistoric times, traveled with migrating populations to North America and then spread across the entire continent, both north and south. There are, without a doubt, many mythical creatures whose existence remains unproven around the world. The difference with Bigfoot is that it has become a phenomenon and is a part of popular culture, not only in the United States and Canada, but well beyond. It is probably one of the most famous cryptids, along with the Loch Ness Monster. How did Bigfoot become so popular? Primarily due to a tremendous number of alleged sightings, literally thousands in the 20th century alone, peaking in the 1970s, when Bigfoot was at the height of its popularity, although they have continued since. The creature transitioned from indigenous cultures to settler populations and eventually to all Americans through the 19th century. This transition happened both locally, between native and migrant communities, and nationally, as tales from Native Americans were collected, translated into English, and published as anecdotes and stories about the mysterious regions being settled. The public was never short of individuals claiming to have seen the enigmatic creature in the woods. At the time, the creature was not called Bigfoot. It had several names, or even went unnamed. One of the names used was Sasquatch, originating from the Salishan people in the northwest United States and the Canadian province of British Columbia. The name Bigfoot is much more recent, first appearing in 1958 and marking the rise in popularity of the creature in the 1960s and 70s. This name emerged in Northern California following an incident at a logging company. One day, a worker discovered a set of large, human-like footprints in the mud, roughly 16 inches long. That's about 40 centimeters. He shared his discovery with his coworkers, and several others claimed they too had seen similar tracks at previous job sites nearby. They also reported strange incidents, such as large, heavy objects being moved without explanation. Members of the logging company started using the term Bigfoot to describe this phenomenon, but they initially assumed someone, maybe even one of them, was simply playing a prank on the group. However, the appearance of the massive footprints persisted. Eventually, they contacted a reporter from a local newspaper. The unusual footprints seemed to sync well with the local tales of large, hairy men, so they relayed this to the journalist. A plaster cast was made of the footprints, and several articles were published in local newspapers, presenting the footprints as either a mystery or a possible prank. Soon, national press picked up on the story, and as a result, the term Bigfoot spread rapidly across America as a reference to a large, wild, and ape-like creature believed to inhabit the wilderness. This revelation resonated with numerous local tales, and the success was immediate. Bigfoot entered popular culture in the late 1950s and 60s, Actually, about one-third of the alleged sightings since then occurred in the American Northwest. Altogether, there have been thousands of reports. The remaining two-thirds come from all over the United States. Hundreds of them were in Pennsylvania, Texas, and various states in the Southeast. So even though Bigfoot is traditionally associated with northern states, and indeed Northern California, where the Bigfoot originated, the scope of the phenomenon is wider. It exists all across the U.S. and in parts of Canada. However, the creation story of the term Bigfoot doesn't end there. More than 40 years later, in 2002, the family of one of the deceased workers from the logging crew came forward and revealed that their father secretly made these large footprints with fake carved wooden feet, and he was responsible for the tracks. Therefore, it was a prank all along. However true or false, this revelation didn't significantly alter the public perception. Perhaps because these kinds of stories in the media fall somewhere between news, science, and entertainment. Exciting hypotheses that people take with a hefty dose of skepticism, but at the same time, they enjoy pondering the possibility of their authenticity. Now, unsurprisingly, zoologists and mainstream scientists in general are not impressed with the Bigfoot narratives. They've raised a number of objections and explanations that cannot be ignored. First, a single creature or animal cannot exist without a larger population for reproduction. Therefore, there couldn't be just one Bigfoot. Instead, there would need to be at least dozens, or given the widespread location of the sightings, likely hundreds. This leads to the major point of disbelief: the notion that a wild species, present in multiple locations in America, has never left a single dead body, body parts, bones, or even hairs to be found. Only indirect evidence like sightings or questionable footprints. That's a tough pill to swallow. There are wild species with only a few thousand individuals that are easily spotted when we look for them. An animal the size of a gorilla doesn't easily hide. The second problem comes from the fact that all known large apes live in the tropical regions of Africa and Asia. There are no known apes inhabiting cold forests because they're not suited to such environments. Hair can provide protection from the cold to an extent, but not when it freezes. If you observe mammals living in cold forests, such as those in Siberia, Canada, or the northwest of the United States, you'll find that surviving animals like bears have a significant layer of fat and more compact bodies with shorter limbs to retain heat. Conversely, smaller animals like wolves and foxes also survive these conditions. An animal with the physiology of a human or a large ape would likely freeze during the winter without clothing or shelter in such a climate. This brings us to the suggestion that Bigfoots might have some kind of shelter or community. But the fact that none of these supposed shelters has ever been discovered makes this theory seem even more improbable. If they possess some level of social organization, an intriguing, perhaps even mind-blowing possibility is that Bigfoots could actually be members of the hominidae family, believed extinct, that somehow survived in North American forests. Hominidae is a family of primates, a clade, or taxon, representing a group of populations with a common ancestor. The members of this family include various subfamilies of apes and the genus Homo, of which we, Homo sapiens, are the only remaining species. Research about mankind and its origins has evolved constantly, especially in the past few decades with the discovery of numerous extinct hominids. The family tree of humanity, from an evolutionary perspective, is not at all stabilized. However, what is quite solid at this point is our shared origins with great apes such as gorillas, chimpanzees, and orangutans, our evolutionary cousins. The idea of man descending from apes, with or without a missing link between us, has been dismissed for a long time. Instead, different branches of hominids evolved from a common ancestor. Different subfamilies or genera, including pongo, comprising orangutans, gorilla, pan, including chimpanzees, and bonobos, and homo. The Homo genus had plenty of species that are now extinct, like the famous Neanderthal, thought to have vanished just a few dozen thousand years ago, but many more have been identified. It's generally accepted that Homo sapiens is the only surviving representative of the Homo genus. However, due to the alleged physical appearance of Bigfoot, it has been suggested that it could belong to another such species like Paranthropus. Paranthropus is believed to have lived between 2.6 to zero point 0.6 million years ago, suggesting they disappeared only 600,000 years ago. They had robust skulls shaped like gorillas and strong chewing muscles, leading to the theory that they were primarily herbivores. However, they could also have been general feeders. There is evidence suggesting the use of very basic bone tools and possibly even fire, although this is not proven. Social creatures, they like living in groups, but their cognitive abilities were probably lower than other Homo species that supplanted them. In physicality, they had large heads but not large bodies. Adult males weighed around 100 pounds. Apart from the size, they could vaguely fit the description of ape men with their forest-dwelling lifestyle, intermittent bipedal walking, and potentially omnivore diet. This discussion remains highly speculative since our knowledge of Paranthropus relies solely on fossilized bones and teeth. In this context, Bigfoot could simply be a species like Paranthropus, believed to be extinct, which now inhabits North American forests. Yet this hypothesis doesn't adequately address why such creatures would be so elusive, leaving no traces of their existence, such as dead bodies, remains, or even signs of settlements. All the Paranthropus's remains ever found were located in Africa, while signs of the occupation of America by members of the Homo family are merely tens of thousands of years old, not hundreds of thousands. It would be quite a surprise to discover that not only had African Homo representatives reached America way before the estimated date, but also managed to remain hidden in the forests of an industrialized nation like the United States. These forests, while wild, are often visited and explored by people, including hunters or those actively searching for Bigfoot. For these reasons, this hypothesis is broadly considered a curiosity rather than a seriously viable theory. That being said, it's nearly impossible to discount thousands of sightings or dismiss them all as pranks. Among the many testimonies collected over the years, there were certainly hoaxes. Even Bigfoot believers admit this. However, it's inconceivable that all of them were deceptive. Some people have testified in good faith about their sightings. Scientists credit the majority of such sightings to misidentified animals, most often American black bears. Black bears, while not hugely sized, can adopt behaviors making them appear as if they were humanoid figures. Under certain conditions, like dense foliage, poor lighting, or from a distance, they can appear ape-like. Also, there are cases of injured black bears walking upright. An adult black bear can stand 5 to 7 feet tall, approximately 1.5 to 2.1 meters, while grizzly bears can reach 8 to 9 feet, around 2.5 meters. So, from a size perspective, these bears aligned with the commonly reported silhouette of Bigfoot. A second possibility is sightings of escaped great apes, like orangutans or gorillas. Such incidents could happen when apes escape from circuses or zoos or private collections, since private ownership of wild animals is quite common in the U.S., particularly in less urbanized regions. These owners will often not report such escapes. While most U.S. environments are not conducive for survival of great apes, some regions in the southeast with humid subtropical climates could potentially sustain a population of escaped apes. Another explanation for sightings could be humans themselves. There have been unfortunate hunting incidents involving individuals claiming to have shot at a Bigfoot. In 2017, a shamanist vacationing in the North Carolina forest while wearing clothing made of animal fur was mistaken for a Bigfoot, leading to a surge in reported sightings. While this anecdote seems quite unique, the existence of hermits or individuals choosing to live in isolation in forests is relatively common. This was especially true in the 19th century with escaped slaves in the South, and even in the 20th century with people seeking isolation, attempting to escape societal constraints, or simply experimenting with different lifestyles. Today, living off the grid is something that attracts people. While forests aren't particularly crowded, there are numerous opportunities for walkers, campers, or hunters to spot something they might identify as Bigfoot. It might be challenging to understand how one could mistake a regular human being for an ape or a giant covered in hair. But when we consider the subjectivity of our senses, it's not as inconceivable. Our senses receive information, visually or auditorily, and this stimulus is merely data. The perception of this data isn't entirely neutral. Our minds automatically search for interpretations, imposing meaningful observations onto these stimuli. Pareidolia, a phenomenon characterized by the tendency to perceive something familiar, an object, a pattern, or meaning, where there isn't any, could explain this. This is why we often see faces, animals, or objects in cloud formations, or occasionally hear voices in random noise or music. If you experience this, rest assured that you're not going crazy. It's a well known trick of the mind, and it could explain why many animal sightings are misinterpreted as encounters with Bigfoot. More generally, sightings of a mysterious phenomenon like this one can suddenly increase when people hear about them in the media. This can be attributed not only to heightened attention, but also to an unconscious trick of the mind that imposes meaningful interpretation on vague visual information or nebulous stimuli. Therefore, for all these reasons, most of the scientific community, and probably the majority of people, believe that Bigfoot is merely a modern myth. However, even though it might seem so, it's impossible to definitively prove that Bigfoot is just a myth. Regardless, the story undeniably holds a certain appeal. Not just the thrill of imagining a mysterious species living relatively close to us, potentially having something in common, but also this taps into the same fascination that led our ancestors from around the world to envision or believe in a larger than life creature that lived in the wilderness, just as we inhabited the territories we've settled. To conclude our intriguing exploration, let's examine another narrative that has offered inspiration for contemporary media, most notably the Blair Witch Project movie, and the influx of haunting films over the past 20 years. Initially considered merely a local legend from the southern United States, this tale was recounted decades after the fact and originated from Robertson County, Tennessee. Its fame has grown, polarizing believers and skeptics. So, what is the story of Bell witch haunting? Centered on the Bell family living in the early 19th century, the father, John Bell, and his wife, Lucy, relocated from North Carolina and settled in Tennessee in 1804. The American South at the time was sparsely populated and mostly rural. Nevertheless, it beckoned farmers from the East Coast, primarily drawn in by the opportunity to settle and farm on untapped land. This is what the Bells did, building a farm on 320 acres of fertile farmland. Their family expanded, and on a modest scale, they flourished and integrated into the local community. John Bell even became a deacon at the local church. They had several children, and despite living somewhat in isolation, almost practicing autarky for food, they were deemed respectable within their time and place. This presumably harmonious life lasted peacefully for 13 years, until 1817. In the summer of 1817, things took a strange turn. Members of the family began seeing bizarre-looking animals around the property. They started hearing knocking sounds on their doors and walls late at night. Eventually, these strange sounds seemed to originate from within the house. The noises mimicked stones being dropped on floors and chains being dragged through the house, culminating in gulping and choking sounds. Due to the disconcerting and seemingly unchristian nature of these occurrences, they didn't discuss the problem for over a year. However, when it became intolerable, John Bell confided in their neighbors, the Johnsons. He invited them to spend the night at the Bells' house to witness the strange events, which the Johnsons did. The Johnsons convinced the Bells to speak out and tell the community what was happening. Accordingly, they did. A committee was formed and an investigation began. More and more people journeyed from miles away to bear witness to this unseen force terrorizing the Bell House. As weeks passed and the phenomenon persisted, it seemed the mysterious force was gaining strength. It eventually acquired a voice, weak initially, but gradually getting stronger, that seemed to come from nowhere. Full conversations soon occurred with this entity. When asked about its identity, the spirit gave several responses, including one of a deceased woman named Kate Batts. This name stuck, and in conversations, the entity, Kate, claimed the ability to reveal secrets about other households and appeared well versed in the Bible, seemingly relishing religious debates. Many accounts suggest that what Kate revealed, from neighbors' gossips to people's birthplaces, was strikingly accurate. The identity didn't seem malicious towards all members of the family, though, but it appeared particularly fixated on John, the father, and Betsy, one of the daughters. Both suffered physical abuse from the entity, with Betsy being pinched, having her hair pulled, and even beaten. John, at times, felt as if sticks were lodged into his throat. Gradually, John weakened, and in 1823, years after the apparent haunting began, he died. Kate, the ghost or the witch, had declared months earlier that she would not leave until John was dead. Another of her obsessions was that Betsy's engagement with a farmer's son should be terminated for some reason. In March 1821, Betsy ended her engagement, and afterward the mysterious Kate stopped appearing and tormenting them. While there are variants to the story, and I have omitted some details, that's a synopsis of the legend. The characters aren't fictional. The Bells and their neighbors existed, and something did occur. However, the story, as relayed here, wasn't documented during or even immediately after the events. Turns out the earliest reference to it comes from a military officer who traveled in Tennessee in 1820 and mentioned in his journal a tale about a farmer's family haunted by a spirit. This correlates with the dates, but lacks detail, and is merely a second-hand testimony. The first known text about this story, an article, was written in 1856. That is 35 years after the supposed events, by an unidentified author. In the article, the story was presented as a deception, and the author claimed that Betsy Bell had learned ventriloquism. In his account, she wished to marry the farmer. The spirit had said that the haunting would continue until they married. However, their engagement ultimately broke off and the entity disappeared regardless. This article was later retracted by at least one of the various newspapers that had published it, on the grounds that Betsy was too young to orchestrate such an elaborate deception, and that it wasn't fair to accuse her 35 years later without tangible proof. That seems fair enough. There were a few more references to the Bell Witch story in the 19th century, but nothing significant. More than anything, it remained a local story, part of the oral folklore of Tennessee, with minor fame in the South. It was only in 1894, now it's 73 years after the incident, that a book titled Authenticated History of the Bell Witch was published by a newspaper editor. The book provides the first full-length record of the story and has since become the primary source for its 20th century interpretation. That's a clear issue, as the author had no first-hand witnesses and essentially had to work with two kinds of sources: the sparse second-hand written accounts from the 19th century and the oral tradition from the area where the Bells lived. Essentially, what he did was to transcribe the local legend as it was by the 1890s, possibly with exaggerations, and presented it as a historical account. This is why skeptics perceive it as a historical fiction or a deception rather than reliable witness testimony. It's at least an intriguing folklore tale that informs us about beliefs and stories that circulated in Tennessee during the 19th century. The truth is, it's difficult to either refute or defend this account. Aside from the fact that the Bells existed and very possibly experienced something unusual at their farm between 1817 and 1821, not much else is certain. At the time, at least, people believed in it. But there are too few elements to further speculate about what actually happened. We don't know the specific dynamics between the family members, if they could have been victims of a prank, if there were any enemies or conflicts in the community, or if anyone suffered from a mental condition. There's simply too much we don't know. The book from 1894 presents answers to all these questions and asserts the occurrence of a genuine hunting. But its reliability depends on the reader's willingness to believe it, which is quite debatable. In the 20th century, rumors spread several times about the return of Kate, the witch. Various books were written, and occasional reports of strange sounds like rubbing noises and piano music from different locations in and around Robertson County surfaced. Nowadays, the site attracts tourists drawn by attractions that provide visitors with a thrill related to the legend. The Bell Witch Cave, one such attraction, does not directly appear in the haunting legend, but is loosely associated with it because it is located on land once thought to possess Bell family ownership. This concludes our mystery stories for tonight. I hope you found them intriguing. You can now let go and fall asleep. Or, if you're not ready yet, you can pick another story from my library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.